So, hey, Zach, thanks for coming along today and joining us on our podcast for a chat. I've got to tell you that you are a favourite of the people involved in our podcast for your rugby analysis and your personality. And for the benefit of our listeners, can you tell us a bit about who you are?
Sure thing, and thanks for inviting me on, guys. Really appreciate it. So, my name's Zach. I talk about rugby on YouTube is probably the short version of it, but Kiwi boy, currently living in Melbourne. I've been over here now about eight years, actually. Love rugby, obviously, which is why I talk about it on YouTube. But yeah, grew up in Blenheim, top of the South Island, so technically Crusaders country, obviously, and so that's sort of my background. But we moved to Wellington while I was in high school, so about 14. So I've got sort of that top of the South, bottom of the North type mentality towards rugby. So Hurricanes and Crusaders.
Wicked. And you loving life in Melbourne?
I do, bro. Yep. Now over here and settled. Got a couple of little ones as well. So now very much settled here now.
Oh, wicked. First question from me is, when did you start creating content and what gave you the idea of doing a rugby podcast?
I started in 2019. So it was back at the last World Cup, actually. And I was taking some time off of work because just had a little one. So I was on parental leave at the time and just thought, oh, well, what can I do to keep busy? I'm sick of changing nappies and heating up bottles and things. So just decided, oh, yep, let me jump on and talk about rugby on YouTube. And it was kind of just came from, I've got a group of mates, we always talk about rugby. So it was kind of just came out of that. Why don't we jump online and talk about rugby? So my very first episode way back when was just me and my brother having a chat about the World Cup. And then they just said, man, you should just stick with it. Just keep going with it. So I decided to do that.
That's awesome you say that, Zach, because I'm on parental leave at the moment myself, and yes. I've been doing some extra recording. So, couple questions with HakaTime. Are there any memorable moments in particular from your HakaTime episodes?
I quite enjoy, and I've just obviously with the final just going, I do sort of more detailed analysis to the lead up to the final, and I do quite like that sort of format, especially after you've got so much data that sort of gathered over the World Cup leading into the World Cup. So I find when I've got access to a lot of data points and a lot of talking points, I can really drill into detailed analysis on upcoming games. So those are sort of highlights for me when I do have an opportunity to drill down into that level of detail. I really, really enjoy it. So in 2019, I successfully picked the Springboks. Well, I'm sure we'll get into it, but I picked the All Blacks this time around. Everything was indicating All Blacks should get on top, and everything, the stats after the game indicates the All Blacks did get on top, except for the score. So,
yep.
And that was another question I had for you. For your data, how do you go about collecting all of that? Not to give away secrets, though.
Oh, happy to share my method, and I'm sure there's a lot of learnings I can take from others as well. But yeah, a lot of it's sort of starts with a bit of feel and just general observation. So I just find that when I'm watching games, just pick up little things, and that sort of spurs me on to investigate a little bit more. It's kind of more a curiosity mentality of if I see something, okay, there's a little chink in the armor here. Let me go and see if the data points back that up, and just sort of follow the bouncing ball. That's kind of how I approach my analysis. It's as simple as that. Something catches my eye, ask a few questions, drill into the data, and figure out, okay, do we have something here or not? And it's sort of how I approach the analytical side of things.
And that's what I like about your show, is that there are some that I have watched in the past but don't follow anymore. That's basically like reading the newspaper afterwards. They give you a rundown of what happened. I'm like, I don't need you to tell me what happened because I was there. I saw it. And I like with what you do is you drill into certain areas and you look for trends of things that are happening. And I find that really is what I was looking for when I found your show. And that's been really good, and it keeps me going back. And so where did you get your rugby background from? Obviously, we're all Kiwi boys. We grew up playing rugby, born with a rugby ball in our hand. But I think you've got a really good grasp of what goes on, way beyond what I have. So where did you learn that?
A lot of it's just probably my background. So if I take all the way back, started playing rugby very, very early, 5 years old, something like that. But I grew up in the shadow of a rugby prodigy. Actually, my brother was a very, very good rugby player. He was He was South Island sprinting champion as well. So he ran the 100 meters at 13 years old in 10.7. So that year he would have qualified for the Olympics. So he was right in and amongst those circles. He was sponsored at a very young age. He was sort of in the wider Canterbury sort of Crusaders catchment area. So we were right involved in all of those circles from a very, very early age. And he had all the talent and I didn't. So my approach was more, I just had to learn to affect the game in other ways. And I sort of developed that over the years that I played. I played flanker in school and then moved into outside centre sort of later post school. And it was just sort of that thing of, okay, well, we've got to try and affect the game in different ways, try and read the game, get ahead of the curve, try and anticipate. It was sort of more of that approach for me. And I think that's a big reason why I now have a more of an analytical approach to the game, is growing up in the shadow of a rugby prodigy.
You sound like Razzie a bit.
Yeah,
Great
probably.
thinker.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we're talking to the next great coach here, I think.
Oh.
And that's another question here, Zach. Have you ever been interested in getting into the coaching side or getting into the rugby statistical side?
I have
in a
actually.
professional setting?
Yeah. No, well, my professional background is in IT. So, I certainly have appreciation for data analytics and advanced data modeling. So that's something I'm thinking of integrating a bit more into HakaTime Rugby. It's been a lot more of a sort of passion project for me, is just being able to analyze the game that I love. But I think there's a few extra steps I'm really interested in taking with it. And it's more exploring that advanced data modeling and trying to gather insights from that. So I'm in discussions now with a few data analytics companies that might be interested in it. So that's probably the sneak peek of where I'm looking at taking HakaTime Rugby.
Wow, because that was going to be a question that I was going to have is like, I think from where you've started to where you've come from, I was going to ask, are you at the zenith of your game? But it sounds like you've got another level you want to go to.
Yeah, I think there's more in that, and it's sort of, as I've sort of identified my niche, I guess, and found that intersection of what I do professionally, what I enjoy to do, and what is now my passion project. There's a really nice convergence there. So for me, and this is probably another thing just generally about YouTube, is, as I say, it's a passion project, but if you start to find those intersections, it becomes a really powerful thing. It's actually easy getting up and, researching late and just getting right into it.
And how do you find your time management with trying to work, your work-life balance? You work full-time, because me and Craig work full-time as well, and trying to find that balance. Do you find there that you're doing a lot of extra late hours, early mornings?
Yeah, I do, and it's one of those things. I work full time as well in IT, as I mentioned, but and I've got two little ones, 3 and 5 years old, so they keep me on my toes. But I've always found when I'm really dialed in, as in when there's the World Cup, for example, I find the time. I just find the time because it's a passion project of mine. So I don't mind working later. I don't mind really getting into it. And I don't know, I just find that maybe balance sort of skews a little bit more towards the passion project in those times. And I just sort of work a bit later and do what I have to fill in the time gaps.
And we've talked about that sort of stuff, both myself and Craig, about the fill your cup mentality. And do you find that that's what it does? It fills your cup and,
Yep.
makes that wholeness for yourself to, feel that completeness, doesn't it? It's
Yep.
very cool.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I think as well, just having those different areas of your life that you can bounce off, right? So you might be really committing time to HakaTime Rugby and I'll be doing a lot of stuff on that. But then when I'm feeling a bit exhausted with it all, I go back to my family and they've helped fill that cup up on that side. And then I've got my professional interests, my mates that I catch up with. So it is about finding the balance. But as I say, when I'm really dialed in, I just find the time.
So all the statistics in that you pop up, because I've seen your graphics, they are exceptional. We'll look at them and we go, that is so cool. Do you come up with those yourself?
Well, at the moment, I'm just accessing data that's available. So I'll go into different websites and just sort of drill into match reports and find things that catch my eye. But I do feel like there's a lot more. I feel like just in generally, rugby as an online medium is underserviced right now, both in terms of data that's available, even to a degree, content. I mean, there's restrictions on use of highlights and things online in rugby, and it actually diminishes some of the content that can be created. So that's another sort of thing that I'm quite passionate about. Is I think there's a lot more we can do in the online space for rugby fans, presenting data in an accessible way, in format that presents really well, having availability of match highlights, and allowing content creators to create. That's sort of a bit of a limitation right now that I see.
Good question, because this sort of takes me back to the conversation we've been having over email around independent content creators and the freedom that we have, that we don't have the bias of being part of a broadcasting network or sponsors and that sort of thing. And that must be something that gives you a lot of pleasure, being able to say what you want, but you do it in a very professional way.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's the independence is the key. Just being free to say what I think and what others think, and I think it just enriches the online experience for everyone. And ultimately, the listeners are the judge as well. So there's a lot of feedback you're receiving in real time, whether it's view count, there's analytics on YouTube as well that'll tell you how things are performing, certain areas of the video they're doing. All of that's real feedback. Then you've got the comments, which you've got to filter it a little bit, obviously, through your own sort of Nelson readership. But, you sort of learn that skill. And I guess at the end of it, as I'm sort of saying, it's all feedback that feeds into your presentation and I guess how you're delivering a message. So that's what I find is quite important from an independent content creator perspective. Is I'm not filtered by anyone. Really, I can choose to say what I want, and it's a powerful tool.
Going back to your analytics, you said that you're going to start working with some organizations, because there are organizations out there that you can get analytics from that you have to pay to get the information from. And there was a chap, and I can't remember what his name was, who was on the Aotearoa Rugby Pod, who is an ex-Wallaby prop.
Ben Darwin.
And he has Ben Darwin. Is that one of the ones you're looking at engaging with?
Not them specifically. There's a couple in the UK that actually do really powerful data analytics. I have meant to reach out to Ben Darwin and his organization, though. But at the moment, I'm just looking to partner with anyone that shares a similar vision to me on how we can present it back to the general public. Like I see myself online ultimately as I'm a storyteller, so, and within that there's insights in rugby that I can provide, there's data that supports it, but ultimately I'm telling a story to people. And that's sort of how I approach my content. Is I'll watch a game, let's say for example the World Cup final, and I'll think, well, what's the real story? Do we want to get into this, boys? Are we ready for this conversation? But it's time, bro.
Yeah.
So like I looked at that and just thought, well, what's the story? Okay, so we've been a bit hard done by, let's say, or from a ref perspective. Well, the 50-50 calls just didn't really go our way. We were probably more on the harder side. There's probably questions around the state of rugby, how it's being policed. We'll get into that discussion for another day. But I look at that and think, well, we were down to 14 men. We should have won that game. Like, the story is actually, we've got a lot to be proud of with our team, because they came through the fire, they dealt with adversity. And then when you look at, well, what did it take for the Springboks equally to match that and to defeat us? It took them having an amazing defensive performance as well. So to me, that was the message that I wanted to deliver in my video, my review. And as I've sort of looked at the data, everything supported that exact view. High defensive tackle count from the Springboks, great work at the set piece, which was unexpected for the All Blacks, down to 14 men. All of those data points really reinforced that message. And that was sort of, at the end of the day, I thought, well, that's the right story to be telling here.
Great angle. I love that. So you have your story, you view the game, look at everything, create a story, and then tell that story, as opposed to just reading what happened in some stats.
Correct. Yeah, that's right. But the story is really dependent on the flow of the game. It's dependent on the statistics and what they say. But it's also a bit of read the room. So, you go online, you start spouting about refereeing issues. Well, half of the people agree, the other people half don't, right? So it's kind of like, do you want to have that discussion online, which is inflammatory and sort of just doesn't really get you anywhere? Or do we want to have a real conversation around the men in the arena and the performance they put on, because to me that was the biggest story.
It was close to a war, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Watching those two teams go at it, and I was looking at it, sort of wondering as well if you were feeling this way, Zach, in terms of a spectacle for World Rugby. So when kids are watching that sort of game, and from an analytical side, the game was great for those reasons. Great ball handling, great skills on show. But as a spectacle for kids watching, or first-time rugby fans watching, how did you feel there that they might look at that?
Yeah, I think this is where World Rugby has a bit of a problem, I think. If we look at how the TMO involves himself in slowing the game down, we look at the tactical stoppages from the Springboks and slowing things down. We look at even disruption at the ruck to slow the ball down, right? And that's all comes very clearly in the stats. That the breakdown itself was very much a disrupted breakdown in this final. All of that slows the game down, doesn't really give us, the spectacle that I know a lot of people want to see, myself included. So I think there's some real questions to be answered, but it's kind of, you start bringing this stuff up just at the end of a final as an All Blacks fan, and it's kind of like people look at you like you're a bit of a sore loser. But no, these conversations have to take place, I feel.
Yeah, because I don't know if you felt this way, but I would rather see a final that was 29-30 than 11-12.
Yep,
and
100%.
it feels, every World Cup, it's basically the who's left over getting to the final in terms of injuries held together by duct tape and string.
Yep.
And they find a way, but it always ends up being a low-scoring final. I think if we go through the last World Cups, except 2015 really was the last really high-scoring one. And that's what we should be building towards with a final, getting great skills on show. It's close, but it's running rugby and it's fun.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's part of the reason of 2015 is because the two teams that were involved, that's our style, that's our DNA, right? If you look at the Wallabies and the All Blacks, other teams have their own DNA that they try and manage against. The English would rather play without the ball than with it. I'll just throw that out there, and obviously South Africa, they play a bit more balanced, but when it comes down to the finals, they revert back to their original DNA, right? Which is, ultimately, you have to say, given the rules, given the focus from World Rugby, it's winning rugby. Unfortunately.
10-man rugby, I think.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's
yes,
right.
my friend Andres calls it 10-man rugby. It doesn't go past the first 5.
Yep. And it's effective in the construct of how the game is played today, And as I say, breakdowns get disrupted, TMO interjections, water breaks, it all feeds into that style.
Well, like you, as we were talking about earlier, I felt the game was ours to be won. We were so close, but for a kick going through the sticks or taking a penalty as opposed to a line out, it was there. And there's a lot of good to be taken from that and how we won that second half with 14 men. We beat their line out. We beat their scrum using our second 5 in the scrum. But the bittersweet part of that for me is that we can't leverage off that team because half of them are leaving.
Yep. It's going to be a challenge for New Zealand rugby, but Razor's coming in, so that's something to look forward to. There's genuine excitement there from everyone that he can make a real difference. And I feel like there's a lot of clues from that final on how the All Blacks can be successful up against those exact styles we just spoke about. I just think
different coach though.
Different coach. So it's going to be interesting the lessons he will take and what he'll sort of persevere with. But there'll be some consistent factors there. Obviously, Jason Ryan, in and amongst it, he'll have a lot to say on how the All Blacks were able to, perform well in that World Cup. And, I'm sure Razor will take a lot of that on board.
Yeah, interesting you mentioned Jason Ryan. Did you hear his story in terms of what happened with him with getting into coaching in the Fords and the risk he took?
I loosely remember it.
He quit his job and everything and just decided, I'm going to have a go at coaching. That's pretty cool, eh?
That's awesome.
Yeah, the sacrifices these guys make and, what we all make to chase our dreams, isn't it? It's very cool.
Yeah, it's conviction, isn't it? And those are the types of people you want to follow, I guess, when it comes down to it. People that are willing to have a crack because they believe in it.
And so for you, Zach, I've got a couple the good old personal questions for you.
Sure.
Who's your favourite All Black?
Ooh, it's Jonah Lomu for me. I mean, I sort of grew up in that era, of Lomu. I was lucky enough to meet him actually as a, I was sort of 14, 13 at the time, met my hero, Jonah Lomu. So there he is in the back, just behind me, as you can see. So a little tribute to Jonah. Sits with me in all my videos. But yeah, he's my favorite for sure.
Yeah. And when you go back and watch the highlights, you think at the time, you're like, this guy's pretty good. And then you go back and watch the highlights. Like, I think I watched I was a sucker for punishment before the French game.
Yep.
Went back and watched all the old rugby games and battles against France.
Yep.
And then I saw the 99 World Cup final and I thought,
Oh,
this guy was like a god.
yeah.
Just
He was unbelievable.
taking on players for fun, right? It was like watching
Yeah.
10-pin bowling play.
Yep. He changed the game and how we think about the game, So just obviously the first superstar of our game, and just made a huge impression on me as a young man.
He took it to a world stage, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. He became that sort of, he sort of went above rugby in some respects in terms of his influence.
Yeah, like a Michael Jordan type of rugby, and
Yep.
how everyone was just like focused in and the world was opened up finally, and then we became professional, really.
Yeah.
New Zealand after that, didn't it? 96.
Yeah, that's right.
And besides Jonah, do you have a favourite Super Rugby player?
Super Rugby player. As I mentioned earlier, Crusaders background, top of the South Island there. So I always really appreciated players like Brad Thorne. Any of the type 5 for the Crusaders were always sort of some of my favorite players. So Chris Jack, Brad Thorne, his time, players like that really stood out to me.
It's the one. Have you ever looked at the difference between when we weren't professional and then when we went professional, and also when we left, or when South Africa left Super Rugby, and seeing the difference between what happened with the All Blacks at those points? Is there enough data for that, or?
I reckon there is. I've never dived into it, but if I looked at sort of my anecdotal thoughts, I mean, when I'm looking at data now, you can see very much it's a risk. A lot of the play, a lot of the areas of the field that the game is played in, and where teams try and limit their exposure, it's all risk reward. So you'll start to see trends on, okay, well, if we're playing in this area of the field, you're more likely to give up penalties in these areas. So stay away from that. There's sort of that kind of trend analysis you can start to see. So, and as I say, I haven't dived into this, but I'd imagine this is what the data would say, is there's probably a lot less of that consideration in the sort of more amateur days. Now it's all about managing risk, managing territory, and possession in key areas. So I'd expect that to come through very clearly in the data. In terms of the South Africa leaving Super Rugby, it's a tough one because the Kiwi teams have always had a lot of success in Super Rugby, including when the South African teams were there. So I'm sure there's some trends. They probably play themselves out more at the international level, maybe. We're seeing some sort of trends more at the All Blacks performance and the Wallabies performance than we are in Super Rugby specifically. But it would be an interesting one to dive into.
And leads me into the next one. I've got a lot of analytical stuff. With Australia, do you think they can come back?
Oh, it's tough. It's tough. It's very competitive in Australia, and the way their administration is run, it's just, I don't know. I think there's a lot of systemic issues that they need to get over. There's huge competition for resources in Australia, given the competition with league and AFL and even basketball and soccer to a degree. It's just, I don't know what the silver bullet is for Australia, but yeah, they're gonna have some challenges for sure.
That raises an interesting point, Jimmy's question about the Boks leaving the Super Rugby.
Mm.
Before and during the World Cup, everyone was talking about really sort of two things. One was that the All Blacks kept chopping and changing their team, and we didn't settle on a one team like Ireland,
Yep.
and that the box leaving had weakened our competition. But for this much, a few centimeters, we would have won the World Cup.
Yeah.
And one thing that's sort of been so those conversations in hindsight, maybe we were looking for reasons to say why we might lose, and these are the reasons, and we're putting them out there. So if we do, it's like, oh well, we did say that.
Yeah.
The other one that's really ripping my shorts lately, and maybe it's just because it's the algorithm on social media, it's everyone talking about how fantastic this box team is. And they're a good team. They don't get me wrong, but they don't transcend rugby. They won 2 in a row. We won 2 in a row. But for, as I said, a few centimeters of a kick, they would have been talking about how 14 All Blacks players beat 15 Springboks in the final, and that would have been a bigger story. So I think I really struggle with that because, it just hurts.
Yeah. It shows the margins. And, same in the semi-finals. The margins are just so fine on the top 4 teams. And, look, we would be talking about this being the greatest chapter in the All Blacks history if they won that game, if for one kick, because they weren't expected to win, right? Everyone wrote them off. Amazing performance against Ireland. You get to a final, you're right in there with a chance, faced with adversity.
14 players.
Yeah, 14 players. If we win that game, they go down as, I think it goes down as the greatest chapter in All Blacks history. And now we're actually talking about 4 win Springboks and them potentially being the greatest team. This discussion is being had online. I'll let others sort of discuss that one. But people are talking about, is this the greatest team in history, the Springboks team? And it's the margins in sport. The finest of margins ultimately dictate those conversations.
I was thinking on that with the Springboks, and interesting there that you say, they've been discussed as this back-to-back is the best. I only think they would be the best if they won the treble. Yep. I think the triple or the 3 in a row, that would be definitive. Yep. And we couldn't argue that. It's going to be interesting to see what the fall off is after this World Cup for all the teams.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in Ireland because I think they're going to be spending 12 years of hard labour. Because I saw their under-20 squad and looked at how they were playing, and I thought, nah, they're not going to be there or thereabouts in 4 years' time. And me and Craig Craig's mainly done the research on France.
And I was just going to say that.
They are going to be a worry.
Yeah. They look to have they're already right there with the top teams, but in terms of that young crop coming through, they look to have a real high upside, the French. So,
and their competition as well. They've got the largest professional rugby competition in the world that draws in so many players. And, so it means they will always be there or thereabouts. But one thing I think I've learned from this World Cup, and we can write us off, but we will still always be there as part of that conversation. We're not going to be that team that was the best because everyone else is caught up. We just have to understand that. We're going to be always in the top 4, I think. So, yes, Springboks were great. Ireland were good as well. France have got a great competition, but I'm more confident now after that World Cup about how good we are doing what we're doing.
Yep, and I agree. I actually think Fozzie, if you look at that game against Ireland, the focus, as I mentioned, a lot of teams now are playing that sort of defensive style game. But Fozzie comes in and focuses on accuracy and high ball and play minutes. And I actually think that is something we can really build on. So it'll be interesting to see if Razor does that, because it doesn't negate a lot of the strengths of those other teams. Get them playing for long periods, and let's see if they can go deep into a game.
Yeah, I want to see the breakdancing Razor again, winning a World Cup. Just World Cup, holding on to it, doing the breakdance. But, you don't win 7 Super Rugby titles in a row by accident. That's one thing there that I was thinking about when he did get appointed coach. It was sort of, eventually it was going to happen.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's his time. I have noticed the moves have slowed down just a little bit as he's sort of getting a bit older. So, but yeah, I'd love to see him breakdancing, even if it's a poor breakdance on the world stage. I'd love to see it.
Getting the Zimmer frame out, eh?
Yeah. Go for it, bro. You deserve it.
Hey, I want to ask you a question and take it back to being about you. What are some of the big learnings that you've had in your process about what you do in your podcast since you started out?
Um, Process. So I guess it's I sort of mentioned this earlier that when I started it was just with a phone. So the first thing I learned was you don't need much. You just need to get up and get started. You figure out all the technology side. You figure out what works for you in terms of editing, and then you sort of land on, well, what's your niche or message? I don't really like that word niche, but what is it unique about you that you're trying to convey to people? And once you land on that, then you're delivering an authentic message, and that becomes way easier. It all becomes so much easier when you're not driven by, as we've spoke about, broadcaster bias or anything else. You've just sort of landed on, this is who I am, this is what I'm about, this is the message I'm delivering, and it just makes it all so much easier, I find.
And this is your storyteller style that you say you have now. So
Yeah.
how long did it take you to sort of land on that? And did you sort of try different styles and different iterations along the way?
Um, yeah. Did I try different iterations? Probably. I probably dabbled in different things. Like I did a couple of. I started doing formats of, during the game, I'd watch the game and sort of commentate. I started doing some of that. That kind of didn't really gel with my approach. I prefer to have access to more data. Prefer to speak quite freely about things. So, yeah, I tried different styles. I previously did a lot more collaborations than I'm doing now. It's probably something I'll return to, but now it's a lot more that I'm clear on my style and what I do. When I collaborate, it's got to be a sort of mutual exchange and discussion more than I used to just be quite giving with my time, and just be like, yeah, I'm up for whatever. Some people would sort of lead me down a path that I'm not really into. So I think it just comes with a bit of nous, and a bit of experience. Um, but yeah, now I'm just really clear on my approach. It's just, it's analytics supporting a narrative or a story that I'm trying to tell to an audience.
Oh, well, then we're really thankful for your time today.
Yeah. It was a great conversation when we started exchanging emails. I was just sort of happy that we're sort of aligned in terms of the process, and I think the role that independent content creators have to play, because that's something that I'm quite passionate about. I just think, as I've mentioned, I think that social media is underserviced in the rugby space. Rugby fans are underserviced online. I think independent content creators have a big part to play in it. So yeah, I'm very passionate about that.
Yeah, fully agree with you there, Zach, because it does a lot of the time when you talk about those the mainstream platforms,
Mm,
it feels very generic,
yeah,
and that's one thing there that I really appreciate about like what you do is that you're finding answers for answers,
mm,
and we see that a lot, don't we, Craig? And when we're looking through social media, where it's just a bland answer,
yeah,
and we actually want a little bit more cheddar to the conversation. We want to know why.
yep,
We want to know
yep,
how this works. And one of my main motivators is when I look at something, I'm trying to go through and talk it through with my kids
mm.
and show them. And yeah, you do definitely help break down that narrative. I can go check out this video real quick, and my son
Yep.
will have a look and go,
Nice. Yeah, it's
yeah,
I mean, I get the benefit of having real feedback in my videos. So, they say don't read the comments. I read every single comment, right? And you've got to filter things, but you do start to see the trends and what people are discussing. Yeah, I feel like we as independent content creators have our finger on the pulse. We can really see how people are feeling, where the big talking points are, what people are curious about. That all helps to shape, how I present and what I deliver.
And I think James makes a really pertinent point about them being generic. They're
Mm,
also untouchable.
yeah.
Whereas like our sort of style is not looking at the big people, it's looking at the
Mm,
people around sport
yep.
who are approachable. And that's, something I see with independent content creators like yourself and even us, is that people can ask a question and get a response.
Yeah.
It's quick and you feel like you actually build a relationship of some sort with the content creator, which you don't with mainstream. They're unapproachable, as I said.
Yep.
And maybe that's the real attraction of what we do, is that you do actually feel some sort of connection with the person when they respond to you
Yeah.
personally.
And I think it's actually it's a mutual exchange as well, because I found in the early days I would sort of throw things out there and I'd get challenged, questioned. It sort of helped me refine my approach as well. So I actually found through the knowledge of the crowd, I was able to improve my analysis, because that sort of questions, it's like the scientific method in play. It's like I throw out a hypothesis, it gets tested, get feedback, adjust, and ultimately we come up with something jointly that makes sense.
And I know you don't like the word niche, but I think that's part of your niche, is that you do give opinions to some extent. And I think that's important because, as I said before, my bugbear is I listen to some of them and it's like reading the newspaper, and they want you to have the conversation in the chat with other people. But I think your ability to actually put forward what you think and your opinions helps actually generate the conversation with you, as opposed to you just putting something out there and encouraging other people to talk. And I think it's that two-way relationship that you spoke about that is something special about independent content creation.
I 100% agree, and it's something that gets me. I even get excited about it when I put something out there and it's challenged and we land on a new outcome. To me, it's what I've always loved about the YouTube format in particular, but it's sort of how I'm approaching things at the moment.
Because do you use other platforms like Instagram, Facebook, TikTok? Like, because there's so many platforms out there. Like, what's your like preferred platforms that you use, Zach?
YouTube's my preferred. I don't really dabble in anything else. I've set up a Twitter account, but after reading a few things on Twitter, I'm almost at the point of shutting that down. I just find YouTube enables me just to present a piece, let's say, create a piece, have it open for discussion, and I find generally the conversation is actually quite cordial. I found other platforms, the discussion very much changes. I'm not sure if that's the maybe it's the demographics, or I don't know what it is, but I just find YouTube's a lot more of a constructive conversation base.
And do you find it easy to use?
I do, yeah, I do. As a content creator, it's very, very simple to upload. I'm obviously use YouTube a lot myself, and find it really, really straightforward. I travel a bit for my work as well, so I've been forced to sort of do stuff on the road, and I've kind of learned that approach. But I do find the technology, you can kind of figure it out. When I'm traveling and recording, I'll have a laptop. I'll generally bring my red microphone that you see in most of my videos, and the camera that I'm using here as well. It all comes with me when I travel, and I can just sort of do things on the road if I need to.
So why did you start with YouTube? There's other platforms out there, like obviously we've gone for podcasting on Spotify and Apple and these sorts of things, but why was YouTube the chosen one? Did you just fall into it, or?
It's a good question. I suppose I was sort of, I think probably the video presentation was a big reason for it. I was someone that's quite comfortable being on camera, so it was kind of like, yes, I want to deliver my opinion. You can do that in podcasts, other formats, Spotify, etc. But also, I'm quite comfortable in front of a camera. So, and I did think at the time that there just wasn't, and I got a lot of this feedback early actually, there just wasn't enough out there on YouTube at that time in terms of analysis on the game. As you said, there was a lot of discussion about events that had happened, but not a lot of detailed analysis. So that was probably another reason, both the technology, presentation format, but also I just felt like there was a bit of a gap there, that certain conversations just weren't being had online at the time.
Did you notice, like during this World Cup, and I don't know who you follow, but that'll be a question for you later on, that during this World Cup, it was just an explosion of podcasts about rugby?
There's a lot more, I sort of think back to when I started in 2019 and now where we're at now. And there's a lot more out there. And I'm all for it. Like, I love seeing more independent content creators. I think it's really, really important, different viewpoints, and we've sort of spoken about this. I tend to focus more on, I don't sort of ref blame or get into any of that, but there are certain channels that do that. And there's a market for that. It's that's a choice that people can make. If they want to have a whinge about a game, there's certain areas they can go to, and I'm all for that choice because I think it enriches the online experience overall. And ultimately, the viewers decide. It's real feedback, based on subscribers and views.
You're right. There's always a market for every point of view, isn't it?
Yep, for sure.
Right or wrong, eh?
Yep, that's right.
So my question, which I was going to ask before, is which rugby content creators do you enjoy watching or listening to the most?
I like so I find Max at the Black Jersey produces some really good analysis. So, and I've collaborated with Max before, and him and I get along. There's a little YouTube community. We all sort of chatting from time to time as well. So most of the YouTubers know each other and know each other quite well. I do follow Rich really closely because I'm probably a little bit less connected to the Northern Hemisphere, so I like to see his take on what's going on up there. He's one that I follow. I also like Distracted Sports as well. He does a lot of stuff with 2 Cents. They do their regular
Oh,
podcast,
yes,
and yeah,
yes.
I
Two
just
Cents
like his
Distracted.
Distracted. I like his I do like his. He's more comedic. He provides a lot of comedy into the discussion, and he wears his heart on his sleeve and he puts it out there. So those are probably the ones that I like following. And then I do tend to follow a lot of the pundits and a couple of unpopular pundits. So Matt Williams, for example, he sort of commentates on the Irish side. I like listening to his view because I just think, okay, is he making sense here? And sometimes he gets twisted in the words a bit, and sort of his messages can be a little bit taken the wrong way. But I do find every now and again I'll listen to him and hear a few nuggets of gold if you filter through it all. Then you've got, I think, Justin Marshall as well, sort of coming on as a really good pundit. James Parsons, fantastic.
Oh, I love James Parsons. He's
Mm.
the best, of the ones that works and broadcast. He's the best.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, we've watched a few of his. Craig sends through a few videos in our chats, and mind-boggling. I
Yeah.
was blown away by what he's coming up with.
Yeah, he's got a real good feel for the game. He's been there, and it's going to be interesting because as I look at trends in other sports around independent content creators, what we're seeing a lot more is players becoming independent content creators and really sort of dominating in their space. Look at the NBA with guys like Draymond Green and JJ Redick. They've got really outstanding podcasts now. I think we're going to see that trend for some ex-players as well.
And that's good because it makes those people approachable, because now they're not approachable, are they?
Yep, exactly.
And I think that's the future of a lot of this. I think the explosion that we've seen with YouTube is replacing a lot of broadcast.
100%. And it goes back to that independence, is people don't want watered down discussions anymore. They're genuinely curious, have questions to ask. And if you get the right balance there, and as I say, I get feedback from people in real time, so I can see the questions that they're asking.
So we mentioned earlier on about feedback, and you talked about how you can tell where someone is from based on their feedback.
Yeah.
Tell us more. That sounds really interesting.
Okay, so I think if I look back to 2019, I can even see trends in how you can almost see trends in how teams are performing based on comments. So Ireland's a fantastic example, right? In 2019, very respectful. What would I say? They were, I think there was a bit of a underdog mentality still at that point. Now they're a lot more confident and a lot more knowledgeable. So I can sort of see, the discussions that I'm having online with Irish fans now, it's a lot more tactical in terms of the nature of the game, and that's part of the reasons, probably the success of their team. Then I look at All Blacks. New Zealand fans have always struck me as extremely knowledgeable and really, really good feel for the game. So that comes through in a lot of their comments. A lot of the challenges I get around some of my analytics is typically from Kiwis, who will say, oh, I disagree with this. I think it's this. I think it's that. And that sort of helps me refine mine. South Africans extremely respectful online. That's a very common trend that I see. And they're really, what's the word? I think they really uphold rugby values is what I noticed. So they're really into the rivalries, the history, and then ultimately they present themselves really respectfully. Some of the Northern Hemisphere teams can be a bit aggressive, I'll say. Actually, the word is probably more, they're very sure of their points, very, very certain on what they're saying with conviction. But sometimes, sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong. So I always sort of take that less certain type approach to my comments. So, but yeah, I can start to see now where I see comments. I can start to see, okay, I think this person's from South Africa. Or I think this person's from, and when you're reading hundreds of comments over, every couple of days, it comes through as very clear trends.
Do you look up their profiles?
No, I don't have time for that.
See where this person's from.
No. Although I do, I do really enjoy the trolls. If I can just sort of touch on that, when I get trolling comments, I normally save them, and then what I do is when I catch up with my mates, I'll be like, "Hey, listen to this one," and I'll just read it off to my friends, and we just sit there having a laugh about it because it's people are just throwing out their opinions. Some people are just spewing crap, as you know, and but you can either take it to heart, or you can just realize someone could be having a bad day. Someone's trying to make a point online, and sometimes it's actually really creative. So I'll just read it to my mates, and we just have a laugh about it.
Okay, what's the worst one, if you can remember, that you've had?
Worst one. Well, I can try and find one here and read one off if you like.
Yeah, go for it. That'd be really cool. If you don't mind sharing, this is so interesting.
No, not at all. And as I say, it's you just realize people's biases when you read enough comments. So it's very easy to disregard people that are just having a bad day. Like, I could just read it and go, okay, you're having a bad day, so I'm not going to take too much. I'm not going to read too much into it. Spout your stuff, get it off your chest, and go about your day. So I tend not to feed into it. I don't react to negative comments. I just kind of save the ones that I think are funny and read them off to my mates. We have a laugh about it over a beer.
Well, you're creating a platform for them to have that conversation. So
Exactly,
I suppose everyone's conversation is valid, isn't it?
That's right. So let me read this one off to you. Here we go. What a pathetic piece of Southern Hemisphere propaganda by a self-appointed analyst who obviously doesn't know anything about Southern Hemisphere rugby. So I'll just, as I say, here's another one. Silly predictions by a brain-dead clown. Like, I'll read these off to my mates and we'll just sit there laughing because it's just someone having a bad day. As you say, they've got the right to sort of, get things off their chest if they want to. That's what the comments are there for. So,
yeah, and people are always going to come up with some sort of opinion, aren't they? And you've got to take it with the water off the duck's back.
You
which
do.
Is great that you've done that.
Yeah, if you buy into it too much, you'll just be thinking about it too much. It'll keep you up at night. So, for me, I can see the trends in comments. I can see when someone's having a bad day. I can see when someone wants to make a point. There's no real sort of, point that they're making other than to, give you a bit of a negative serve, and that's fine. That's what it's there for. Get it off your chest.
And on the other side, Zach, do you find there that you get a lot of positive feedback?
Yeah, I do. But I'll say as well, I equally filter that through a lens of if I'm agreeing with someone, then I expect to get more positive comments. And the other side, if you're disagreeing with someone, you get the kind of trolls popping up. So I think it goes both ways. You kind of have to filter both the positive and the negative if you really want to land on some insights.
Very cool.
So something I've wondered when I watch your shows, do you actually work off a script or are you just straight off the top of your head?
I just speak for whatever it is, 8 minutes, 9 minutes, 10 minutes. So my process is I'll generally, as I mentioned, I try and find the story within the game. The stats will lead me there. Then when I've realized, okay, this is the message I want to deliver, then I'll highlight a few key points and I'll just write them up next to my camera on the screen so I can see them. And then I'll just start talking. So the hardest part for me is getting past the first minute, right? I'll sort of do a bit of an intro, just start talking about. Once I get into the flow, after about a minute, it's fine. I just keep going and just sort of go through the points. But I find myself stopping and starting in that first minute sort of 5 or 6 times before I really get into that flow.
It's the beauty of editing, isn't it?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, we've been doing, because I've been learning editing off Craig, and hey Craig, we've been having some great fun. It's really cool what you can put together and what you can mix and match, and then you listen back on the soundbite and you're like, wow, that I created that.
Yeah.
It's very cool. You must be getting a really satisfying feeling from when you've patched it all together. And that's one question there that I had for you. When you made your first video, how did that feel?
It was, well, I still get the same feeling today. It's quite exciting, you know. It's I mean, at that stage it was all new, but just it's sort of I look at each piece as almost like a mini project. It's kind of like I have a story to tell, I go through a process, I record it, and then I present something back to the world. It's kind of like it's really it feels like a mini project every single piece. And I like the feeling of, oh yeah, I did a good job on that one. Yeah, I delivered the message well. Yeah, I said what I wanted to say. Like I get satisfaction from that. And I think that comes back to more being a content creator or that kind of thing. There is a bit of an artistic side to it, I feel, in that you're sort of creating something to put out there to the world. So as you say, like a little bit of editing, I get the editing right, I do this, like it's all part of the process of creating something. And when you create it and put it out there in the world, it's really satisfying. That's sort of what keeps me coming back to it as well, is just that feeling of, okay, I did a good job on that one. I got the message out that I wanted to share, and let's see what happens with it.
And it sounds and
So
looks
I have
cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it looks bloody good, mate. Otherwise, I wouldn't have reached out to you and said, "You're really interesting. We want to talk to you."
Well,
I have one last question in regards to your show.
Yep.
So, what ethics underpin your show?
Rugby
You
values.
sort of touched on them briefly.
Yeah,
Okay,
rugby
yep.
values. So I'm old school with that kind of thing. It's respect for your opposition. It's respect for the referee. It's play hard on the field, and then go have a beer with your opposition afterwards. I think back to my club rugby days and just think some of the best nights of my life were, ripping in a game and then going have a beer with the opposition afterwards. So I do think there's something pure about that with rugby in particular that we have over other sports. And for that reason,
Mm,
that's why I try and find that middle balance, is because I come back to the values of rugby.
wicked.
That's awesome, Zach. My last question for you, who were your rugby clubs?
Well, when we moved to Wellington, I was sort of 13, 14. Wainuiamata is where I grew up or finished school. And then I played for Porneke in Wellington as well. Never at the top levels, some of the lower grades, but I had fun.
Awesome, mate. That's cool. Like there's few notable names from both of those places. So
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Zach, my friend, I really want to thank you for your time today. It's been so awesome talking to yourself, and you've been so generous with your time, mate. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. I've enjoyed that one. Thank you.
cheers, Zach. Absolute pleasure.
Yeah, it was fun.